high. Sorry about that. I wasn't properly calibrated. I'm here today to tell you about the computers I used when I grew up. Let's get right to it. The first computer I ever used was my brother's Sinclair ZX81. Take a look at the keyboard. Interesting shortcuts, don't you think? Also, instead of actual keys, there is simply a plastic membrane over the switches. Typing on it was a bit of a chore. To store data, you had to plug in a regular cassette recorder, and record it on a cassette tape. Saving and loading took ages. It only had 1K RAM, meaning that even if the data was pure text, it couldn't store more than 1024 characters. Luckily, there was a 16K RAM pack expansion, which you simply plugged into the back of the computer. Imagine increasing your computer's RAM by 1500%. My brother mostly used it for programming with BASIC, but he had at least one game. I can't remember what game it was, but these are some of the popular games for the ZX81. As you can see, the graphics were quite primitive, and there was no sound. I didn't actually use the ZX81 a lot. I mostly just watched my brother use it, but that would change with our next computer. The Commodore 64 was amazing when it came out. The graphics and sound blew me away, and there seemed to be an endless ocean of games available. My brother did some basic programming on it, but I was only interested in the games and demos. Here are a few examples to give you an idea of how it compared to the ZX81. I usually played on a little black and white TV set in my room, but every once in a while I used the family TV and enjoyed the dazzling color. Unlike the ZX81, the C64 had a dedicated dataset drive for your cassette tapes. But although all my friends had dataset drives, we had a disk drive, which was super fast in comparison. There were lots of other peripherals like printers, monitors, and a mouse, but we never had any of those. The C64 is where I first encountered a graphical operating system, GOS. It was surprisingly full-featured. You had to load it from a disk or cassette though. Despite the fact that more powerful computers were released shortly after the C64, it remained very popular. In fact, it was produced for a whopping 12 years, from 1982 to 1994. According to Guinness World Records, it is the best-selling desktop computer of all time. One thing people remember very fondly about the C64 is its sound chip. It has a very characteristic sound. This music by Rob Hubbard, from the game International Karate, is a good example. Listen to the peculiar drum-like sounds here. It doesn't sound like any instrument, really. Instead, the sound chip itself is used as an instrument. Look up Rob Hubbard's C64 music on YouTube, and you will find many great examples of this. Loading a game from a cassette tape took several minutes, so in order to entertain during that long wait, there were loading screens with a beautiful graphic and cool music. Because of this, There are plenty of very long and complex compositions. Oftentimes, the music people remember fondly isn't from the game itself, but rather from the loading screen. What you're hearing right now is the opening of Martin Galloway's loader music for the game Parallax. It is over 11 minutes long, and might be described as a symphony, with several distinct sections or movements. But enough with the C64 nostalgia, let's move on. Although I love the C64, our next computer made it seem antiquated. Let's meet our mystery superstar guest. The Amiga 500. Compared to the C64, it was much faster, had much more RAM, and had way better graphics and sound. And the games loaded automatically when you inserted the diskette into the built-in disk drive. In short, it was amazing. As you can hear, the Amiga 500 could play high-quality samples on 4 sound channels. And the music sounded like it could have been played on the radio. The amazing sound would be the reason I continued using the Amiga to make music for many years. But what drew me in was of course the game. Like the C64 had done when it came, the graphics and sound just blew me away. Many games had animations that made it feel like you were controlling a movie or cartoon. I can't imagine how many hours I've spent playing these games. Although you could buy a mouse to the C64, I never met anyone who owned one. The Amiga, on the other hand, came with a mouse, so it was a natural part of many games and programs. One of the programs I used it for was the music editor Noise Tracker. I kept making music in Noise Tracker for many years. And I lived happily ever after. No, wait. The story is a bit more complex. We need to go back a few years, because somewhere along the line my dad got a computer for work. The Macintosh SE. It was a very compact little thing, with a separate keyboard. A little mouse with only one button. And a teeny tiny built-in monochrome screen. It doesn't sound very exciting, does it? But it was surprisingly powerful. For example, it had 1 megabyte RAM, and an internal hard disk. And it had a purely graphical operative system. It had some really fun games. Although the graphics were monochrome, the high resolution was very impressive. As you can see, the resolution is roughly the same as Scratch. And the very small screen, just slightly larger than an iPad mini, made the resolution seem even higher. But most importantly, it had HyperCard. HyperCard was kind of similar to Scratch in a way. You could make interactive graphics, slideshows, animations, or simple mouse-based games. You didn't use blocks for the code though, but a scripting language called HyperTalk. The name HyperCard refers to the idea that you make a series of virtual cards you can switch between. By the same logic, projects were called stacks. I didn't have any books to learn from, but I studied the example stacks and experimented to learn how to code. I absolutely loved making HyperCard stacks. To give you an idea how a stack might look, let me show you a simple game I found on the Internet Archive. It's called Storybook, and was made by Gary L. Simmons. First, an introduction. You enter a series of nouns. Then you do the same thing for adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and body parts. Lastly, you enter two names. And then you get a story using the words and names you entered. Fun, right? You could do the exact same thing in Scratch. My dad also had a series of PCs. I think he had at least one before he got the Mac, but I don't quite remember. I'll just give you a sense of what PCs in general were like in the late 80s. There was a huge difference between low-end and high-end PCs, and many kept using old ones for many years. Depending on your graphics card, a game might look like any of these versions. And depending on your sound card, the music might sound like this. Like this. Like this. Or like this. In short, it was a jungle. Last, and certainly least, I have to mention the computer from my junior high computer class. The Compass. This computer was developed as an educational computer for Swedish schools. There is nothing wrong with the computer itself, it is actually quite interesting. I can see how it seemed like a good idea to develop it, when the decision was made in 1981. When it came to the operating system for the Compass, the choice fell on CP/M86, which wasn't a bad choice at the time. But because of various delays, it wasn't shipped to schools until the mid-80s. And by then, it was already obsolete. During that short time span, IBM PC computers with MS-DOS had become the world standard for business computers. In other words, what we learned in computer class was totally irrelevant outside of school. But despite this, the Compass was used for computer classes until the mid-1990s, when Windows 95 took the world by storm. My only vivid memory of the Compass is when I played Snake on it. Okay, I think I've covered everything relevant now. I hope you enjoyed this very educational history lesson. Bye.